Shinji and Warhammer40k, Chapter 26, Timeskip Troubles, Part 3. Tokyo 3 had grown large enough, fast enough, that there was a tertiary command crew that allowed the primary and secondary bridge bunnies to go out to the city and have fun at the festival. This of course raised the complaint of being damned unfair from those stuck at watch, but seniority did have its privileges. Makoto Hyuga accompanied Kaede Agano to one of the new coffee shops popping all over town, weighed down with purchases and wondering, is this a date? Possibly, since they were in civilian clothes. The problem was that neither of them had, except in rare instances, a take-charge sort of personality. It was all so sickeningly cute, and their friends were disgusted with them. They sat and watched the people on the street go by.
It's strange, don't you think, Hyuga-senpai? This fortress city's never looked alive. It's more like a theme park than anything.
It's all gone rather political, I'm afraid, he nodded. In some small way, he still carried the torch for Masato, but this was also tremendously encouraging. A man with a crush on his senpai has a woman with a crush on her senpai. How so friggin' balanced. It was a good time to be Makoto Hyuga. It's not nerves, just nerve show. There's Trident, there's the national government, and they'll have to make it look like it's all nice and friendly. Kaede snorted.
Right.
Friendly was not how the three powers wrangling for control of Tokyo 3 behaved behind closed doors. The power vacuum from the loss of both Ikaris led powers all scrambling for control over the city. Nerve had direct control, but not economic, which was held mostly by the support community around Trident Base. The political power of the Diet and its innate authority over the citizenry was stymied slightly by the media popularity of the Tokyo 3 celebrities. Kaede looked thoughtful.
The committee's gone all out this time. They're trying so hard it feels like something's missing. Like a court without its king.
They made small talk while waiting to be served. It was a fairly busy place. After a while, she pushed off the table to stand.
Excuse me a moment, senpai.
She looked towards the bathrooms. Makoto made some neutral noise, and she left. He looked outside at the stream of people going by. The sun was high in the sky, and everything seemed so bright. It was a good day. And who should he see walking past but Kodama Hiraki? Their eyes met and she grinned in recognition. Very quickly, she crossed the street and plopped down on the empty seat. She kicked at the plastic bags.
So you've been shopping? Nice. More fuel for your brain, so we can pump it for ideas later.
Hiraki-san. Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by the arrival of a waitress, Riff coffee and chiffon cake.
Oh, thanks. Nice service.
Kodama had no hesitation about immediately going for the cake. As she explained, she was left walking all day with the guided tour. How she envied that Nerve had so much time to spare. She needed the carbohydrates for her own fuel.
The Evangelion fantasy RPG's almost done. Have you ever thought about voice acting?
Kodama looked up to see only bewildered terror on his face. Surely the thought of being around her a little more couldn't be that horrible. Hell, they were even getting comfortable. She had a feeling they both found intelligence sexy. Some of those brainstorming sessions got really steamy.
Excuse me, you're in my seat, she heard a voice say from behind her. You're eating my cake.
And get your claws off my boyfriend was left unsaid, but heard all the same.
Oh.
Kodama glanced again at Makoto, as if accusing him.
I see.
She made no move to get up.
My name's Kodama Hiraki. I was just asking him about some projects we have going on together. Isn't that interesting?
Kaede hissed.
My name's Kaede Agano. We both work together in Nerve.
Then both women smiled. Little bitch / old hag ran through their minds. One could feel the air starting to grow charged and heavy. Makoto felt like running and screaming, but at the same time seemed bolted onto place. He never really crossed the line of being just friends with either woman. He'd read enough fiction to realise, just suddenly, the minefield he'd stumbled into. He who seeks to model his life after Shinji Ikari had better be prepared to accept his problems. So intent were the three in their tableau, that the warning horn was left completely unheard. Oh crap, now they're looking at me. What do I do? What do I say? Oh, someone help me! he screamed out silently. The high-intensity laser carving up the street proved sufficient distraction. One of the changes from having a military officer in direct command over Nerve's active assets was the addition of high-speed elevators sprinkled all over the city. This made for more weak points in Nerve security, which was why each conspicuous location was a small tower of reinforced concrete with a heavy bolter auto turret on top, landmines to the side, and a collapsible tunnel beneath. Each station had its own computer system separate from the Magi, and access without proper authorization would be met with immediate and lethal punishment. The pilots entered the nearest and belted themselves into safety chairs. The elevator cabin literally plunged 300 meters down, and there was a short sensation of weightlessness, followed by the staggered thumps of braking systems. The girls exited, then began to take off their clothes. There were already plug suits prepared in lockets at the end of each elevator. The tunnels all led directly to the Ava cages. Less than 10 minutes later, the entry plugs were being inserted.
See? Why didn't we have this system in the first place?
Masato shouted up at the command center.
Because it's hideously expensive? Ritsuko responded dryly. You do remember that if you keep approving every allocation form that crosses your desk, we're going to run out of money to keep even the vending machine stocked?
Masato coughed and waved aside dismissively.
It's not like I'm the last link in the budget chain.
Kozo Futsuki still had to give his approval, then Kaji had to persuade the UN to fork over.
Those figures scare me, but at least it's useful, right? Aren't you going to send us out?
Asuka asked over comms.
We're here! Let's kick Angel ass already! Don't be in too much of a hurry. We need to know more about this enemy before we attack. Ritsuko, what do you have?
The scientist sighed.
How like the military. Hurry up and wait.
She frowned while looking up at the main screen.
I would have preferred being able to detect this angel sooner. Maya, why did our sensor web fail to notice its approach? Actually it did, Senpai. It just crossed them too quickly for anything to be done other than raise alarms.
Ritsuko and Maya had elected to stay behind instead of going off to join the crowded festival. Masato had gone back to drag them out of their offices. Thus, the essential command staff could fortunately be mustered quickly. Shigeru and Makoto's stations had fresh trainees nearly scared out of their wits from their first combat encounter. But fortunately, again with the Angel arrived to Tokyo 3, their tactical information was less significant. Ritsuko blinked as the calculations between the depth of that sensor web and the Angel's arrival finished blazing through her brain.
That's fast, she had to admit. If it didn't slow down as it passed the troposphere, it could have been the equivalent of a mass driver.
Shit. Tokyo 3 would have been hollowed out. No defense.
Masato, we need to train the pilots to get underground even faster after this. We need to be able to raise an AT field barrier at a moment's notice. Now you're starting to understand why air power rests at the apex of the triad of victory,
Masato replied, grinning.
Alright, since it's already over Tokyo 3 limits, we get the automatic jurisdiction. Get the PDF forces online. I want those secondary defense cannons ready to fire at my order.
Positron cannon roosts opened up from the hill around the city. Each positron cannon was pre-charged with its own capacitors, enough for only 3 shots. Fixed megabolter and missile emplacements likewise turned to aim.
How's the evacuation?
Masato asked next.
There were a lot of civilians up there.
Mostly done, Mom, someone reported from the tactical stations below. Windows on the secondary screen showed people crowding into evacuation trenches. Tokyo 3 had no real foundation to speak of, as the ground was merely the roof of the geofront. Straight pits and tunnels were dug to funnel civilians towards the underground shelters, while at the same time keeping the streets clear for rush military traffic. There were still a few vehicles rolling around the streets, but it was heartening to see how quickly the evacuation plans were carried out. The dense packing of people at the festival was the best test scenario.
Good! Scan that thing with everything we've got!
Masato commanded. Ireul hung 14 kilometers above Tokyo 3, and at that distance was little more than a bell-shaped black blob. A closer view revealed a certain resemblance to spiny sea anemone. Even through a screen there was something faintly disgusting about it, but none that they could identify. Then the screen flared. Redundant systems tried to keep an image through the static haze. Angel has raised its AT field. Laser imaging distorted by 3%, was the report. Increasing scanning frequency. The screen flared again and blanked out. Heavy electromagnetic pulse!
Is the source nuclear?
Ritsuko gasped.
No, but with enough hard radiation.
Her eyes widened with other methods the angels could have tried to break through human resistance.
Why are human beings so fragile?
She spat.
All weapons fire! Launch Evangelions!
Misato shouted. Inwardly, she was starting to rail against her lingering habit to wait and see before acting, as if there was still someone watching over her shoulder. She had direct command over military affairs now, and thus no one else to blame for any screw-ups. The cannon roosts above the city had independent tracking systems. 6 bright lances shot up to the sky. 2 missed utterly. 4 beams crackled against the Angel's AT field. Then, there was a deep rumbling bass tone that broke windows all over the city.
I can't believe you're really going to run all the way to catch up.
Hikari sniffed in disdain even as she rubbed Toji's back.
Think before you act sometimes. Do you need someone else to do that for you?
The only response he could give were gasps of breath. The ice cream man merely chuckled at the signs of young romance. He saw the go-karts ahead go around the bend and shifted gears to accelerate. There was a flash and a sizzling noise. They would have died if they remained near the starting line. All the other go-karts parked there were instantly turned into molten slag as a reflected positron beam slashed down for a second or so. Toji groaned. With no other contestant, the boys were default winners for the day. It was going to get political. No helping it now. Then the sound hit. The van's metal skin screamed and it swerved out of control. The driver wrestled with the steering wheel for any measure of control and just barely kept his vehicle from slamming face first into a storefront. The van skidded to a stop and nearly pitched over. Then the second tone hit, and the one after that. Their hearts felt like exploding. It was a wall of sound that pressed down upon the city. The winds blowing through building facades filled the air with torturous wails.
What is that? Toji!
Hikari felt her own tears fall hotly down her cheeks. She bent over and took in lungfuls of air. She still felt as if suffocating. Her insides felt cold, shrinking and starting to crack. She didn't feel afraid, for fear was such a small term for the numbing, all-absorbing shock she was feeling.
No!
She screamed inside.
Why am I acting like this?
She'd always been the most responsible of the Hiraki siblings. She could barely even remember their mother, who had died shortly after giving birth to Nozomi. Their father had tried, but he moved the family to Tokyo free for the work opportunities, all the while hiding the cancer second impact implanted into him. Kodama was old enough when he died, but the family didn't need to split up. The eldest had to work to keep the family alive. But Hikari, to her fell the task of being strong enough to keep them all sane.
I'm a girl, but I'm stronger than this. Please, I need to...
She felt so weak and small and helpless and so alone before the world, exactly like that moment right at her father's funeral. The doubts she thought she had set aside returned, grown large over the years.
Toji!
She screamed. Her eyes were all blurred with tears. Could she... Pathetic that the only thing she could rely on was the fool that she loved. Crude, perhaps, but stubborn and dedicated in his own way. She felt their arms embracing her, so tight it was starting to hurt. Hikari, Toji whispered in a choked voice. Hikari had to live with the aftermath of death, but he had to face every day with the knowledge his sister's immune system would surely and finally fail. He hated feeling so useless, knowing there was nothing he could do but watch. One of the most fundamental fears was in being alone. That crushing terror was still there, but it was as if a thin wall muted it enough that they could remember who they were and what it was doing to them. "Goddamn angel!" Toji muttered. He held Hikari tight. He had his eyes shut, and his spine still tingled like it might shake apart. But the freezing pit of fear was slowly starting to be pushed aside by that warm, familiar sensation of aimless teenage rage. Hikari felt so small in his arms. Weird, for she had always seemed larger than life to him. Without her arm of common sense, her whip-like judgment of propriety, she was just a normal girl. No more questions. No more edicts. She was just someone he wanted to protect. "Who the hell does it think we are?" he snarled, burying his face into the nape of her neck. Sure, he was known for doing some careless, dumb things, but no one could ever accuse him of lacking reckless courage. The feeling of warmth in his arms, she was still there, and the only thing he feared was losing those he loved. They both heard a guttural scream. The teens looked up to see the driver clutch at his head, his Adam's apple twitching grotesquely. He slammed his own head into the steering wheel, cracking the plastic and sounding the horn. Wham! Beep! Wham! Beep! Wham! Beep!
Stop him!
Hikari shouted, snapping out of her haze. Outside, the angel's tone still beat. Brum, brum, but adrenaline and concern overcame that. The two wrestled him to a halt until he grew quiet. There was blood at the steering wheel. Damn it, mister. That's not gonna help, Toji said as he kept the ice cream man pinned to the driver's seat. The man merely grinned, blood dripping down from the cut on his forehead. Yes, it does. Pain's real, you see, he mumbled, lolling his head from side to side. Everything just stops. Gotta move. Gotta feel anything else. Pain lights up the dark. He drifted into incoherence, then to unconsciousness. At first the teens were afraid he'd injured himself too much, but even their meagre knowledge at first aid could tell it was just the sleep of the exhausted. Their eyes met and widened in simultaneous realization. They still felt some of that irrational terror, and if it could affect a grown man that badly. Oh shit! The kids! Toji shouted. He waited for Hikari to nod, then pushed open the side doors. It felt like drowning, as his flesh hummed in response to the seething air. It rushed in, squeezing at their hearts. Toji grit his teeth and forced himself outside. Hikari's hand clutching his. That gave him the strength he needed to stand up, even as the sky threatened to fall. His sister was out there, his sickly, timid, precious little sister. Oh, and those other brats too. The boys had to be scared out of their wits. He looked down the avenue. There, several blocks off, the boys' carts had crashed together in a three-way tie. The children were nowhere to be seen. Not too far away, Makoto Hyuga pushed himself off the floor. Unsuccessfully, as the two women atop him had sufficient combined weight to sap his leverage. Any attempt to push them off needed his hands to be put to dubious positions. Wisely, he decided not to call any of that to attention. They regained their senses soon enough anyway.
Ah! What was that?
Kodama groaned. The alert siren was still ringing.
An angel Ah!
She gasped as the feeling hit. Kade sat up and put her hands over her heart.
Senpai, what's happening?
Her face was hidden under her page boy haircut as she bent over. It can't be that simple. Can it? Makoto asked aloud. You know how low-frequency sound waves can make some people uncomfortable? He tried to get up, but fell back, his nerves unwilling to respond. Are you all right? He asked the two. They grimaced, but responded yes, more or less. So far, the angel hadn't done any physical harm, but that couldn't be expected to last. What would he do? Makoto thought. Decisiveness. Caution is good, but fear eats at the chance of success. How's that go? Audacity. Ever audacity. He pushed his eyeglasses up and smiled slightly. We can't just sit around here. It's our job to protect this city. Kade stopped shaking as he put a hand to her shoulder. Kodama merely gave him a hollow look. The angel's presence intensified the moment. Her expression was full of tragic acceptance. You're not going to abandon me, are you? She sighed. The pain of being rejected, in accepting that, blunted the edge of induced fear. You don't think that protecting our people's will to endure is as important as their physical safety?
Senpai?
Now it was Kaide's turn to look up in confusion. You're going to take her with us? She wanted to ask, but as a nerve employee, she too could not just abandon a civilian. Makoto stood up and was briefly silhouetted against the light. Those who could fight back were already doing it. Upon the rim of panic were manually firing the strong point defences at the angel. Ireul was steadily lowering itself and flattening out its shape. The booms and cracks of Megabolter and Positron cannon melted into the oppressive humming. The taller buildings suffered from deflected or returning shots. His knees still felt weak. That paralysing feeling, God help anyone caught outside. They would be helpless as shells and beams and debris fell all around them. While off duty, his first responsibility was to the city, to make sure its people were safe, at their shelters or otherwise. He looked down at his clothes. Jeans and a t-shirt didn't make for a figure of authority. It had to be known at first glance that he worked for Nerve, and that they had to listen to him for their own safety. To break through crippling personal terror, he needed an undeniable symbol of authority. It was Kodama who recognized that frantic look in his eyes. Shinji Ikari was not around, so someone, anyone, had to say it wasn't okay to just roll over and die. There were metaphors used to imply that cities were somehow alive, as if the press of millions of people and their little concerns and emotions and ambitions somehow all taken together imparted a sense of being into their place of purpose. Metaphorically, Tokyo 3 was hurting. Far away, inside a closed chamber deep inside a monastery, Shinji Ikari lay limp in the arms of a screaming woman. He was bleeding from the nostrils, his skin was pale and clammy. Hasia could recognize signs of potential mental damage.
Satava, please wake up! Help! Healers! Anyone! We need help!
So far away, he whispered inside. I'm sorry. I've been selfish. I shouldn't have left. It felt like his strength was being sapped away, torn into countless little shreds. What can I do? Pilot Ikari. Ray's voice intruded, then fading off. The sound of his own heartbeat pounded heavily upon his consciousness. Behind it was a second beat, humming with malicious resonance.
God damn it, I can't do this!
He next heard Asuka's voice, then a scream of pain. A third voice, also female, but unfamiliar to him. Help me. I'm here, he gasped. So far. What can I do? I'm just a boy. I don't have the power. He opened his eyes suddenly. Hasia's face was full of concern, fear, and relief that he was awake. He could feel her selfless worry, engulfing all other emotions. Is this what it feels to have a mother? He smiled sadly. I'm sorry. I need your help again. She bowed slightly, even as she held him in her arms. Her eyes grew unfocused. Her own smile was of a profound joy.
I live to serve you, my young king.
Monks and acolytes, drawn by Hasia's earlier calls for help, arrived just in time to see Shinji plunge his hand into her skull. Half a world away, the sky was filled by the sound of an eagle's screech. N. Nuclear. B. Biological. C. Chemical. Into these of forbidden demons of warfare we must add a fourth, equally as terrible and morally indefensible. T. Telepathic. It is an attack against which all the armies of the world currently have no defense. There is only one vessel of war with complete NTBC protection. That alone should have it more than just unconventional, but utterly removed from political, strategic, and tactical control. It must remain our final resort, that one strong mind could shield the many. Inept ambition, over even one, is a great loss to all humanity. Yang Wen Li, 2016. The Complete Struggle. The screens of the command centre were an absolute mess. The use of an AT field to inflict total sensor jamming was a development that many militaries found disquieting. It rested upon Nerve to develop tactics and countermeasures that might eventually be used against them by their own supposed allies. Audio, however, that was clear. They could hear the screams. There were few cameras monitoring the shelters, and of those that could still operate under the force of the Angels' jamming showed scenes of blind panic. Most people had withdrawn into a self-imposed catatonia at the worst, or just clutching at the nearest person for emotional relief. Even deep in the geofront they could feel it, that desperate longing, and a clear realization they were small, squishy beings in a vast, impersonal universe. Misato frowned. It was a familiar feeling.
How's the Angel doing this thing? It can't be just sound. Some of those shelters are total bunkers, completely isolated from the outside.
She leaned over the edge of the command tower, glaring up at the enemy.
How's it even affecting us here?
Fucking AT field magic, Ritsuko muttered under her breath.
The Magi's done the permutations. Recommendation: subjective analog approach.
The scientist smiled grimly.
That means let the pilots have their Evangelion sorted out, as we puny little mortals don't know what the hell we should be doing.
Masato snorted.
In other words, playbait.
She waved aside to signal open comms.
Ray! Asuka! What are you getting?
The AT field's ability to distort the electromagnetic spectrum gave a peculiar paradox. For the first time, a war machine massing several thousand tons could hide far more effectively than a 30-ton tank. This was due to the second aspect of the AT field, in that it could also serve as a shield, disguising even the mental presence of its pilot. An AT field could, with very little ease, create a hard vacuum around itself just by pushing all the air out of the way. A psychic vacuum was harder to make, but it was with steely discipline that the two Evangelions hid, each behind closed doors of building egress points.
It is unpleasant, Ray reported. The low-frequency waves appear to be a side effect of the Angel using its field in a scanning mode. It is apparently capable of penetrating ground layers, while at the same time holding a defensive shield, jamming most forms of our counter-scanning, and maintaining its own form of propulsion.
We've done this in simulation before,
Asuka added.
Hell, I can try the same tricks. It's doing them all at once that's the problem.
Ray looked distracted in her comm window.
It should imply a loss in efficiency. That's an assumption, and in the battlefield just a shy removed of a mistake,
Masato said, remembering just how much punishment the previous Angels could take before dying. As far as AT field strength was concerned, Ireul was likely the strongest, but it had to alternate between propulsion and regrowth.
By the way, are you girls doing anything to buffer whatever it's doing with the AT field?
No, but I don't know how it's even penetrating all the way down there if you can feel it. Damn thing's like scratching into your soul,
Asuka replied. Metaphysics was an accepted science, without which most of their technology would have been inoperable. The AT field could be a barrier, but what could really be a barrier to the AT field? Everyone pretended not to hear a certain blonde muttering about quantum mechanical bullcrap.
Regardless, I believe the effects will intensify as distance between us and the Angel decreases, Ritsuko snapped out. Any more of this for those stuck in the shelter, and we're going to find out just what it takes to turn people into animals.
Masato winced. Confined conditions could get bloody really quickly.
All right, Asuka, Ray, you're clear to engage the enemy. You know the drill. Defense, offense, then switch.
Roger.
We're on it!
Nerve and Inhis had their own toys, but cooperated fully in the design and assembly of Type T Evangelion equipment. Emplaced defences, weapons, etc. These were secondary to the fact that the most dangerous weapon that humanity has ever made was the Evangelion in of itself. Just how dangerous, no one had any real idea. Titan modules directly reinforced the sheer basic lethality of the Eva. Titan modules serve two purposes. 1. Extend an Evangelion's range of operations in time and distance. 2. Provide increased armour protection for even fiercer fighting. The prototype Titan armour, based upon the Jet-alone fusion core and scrapped Trident plans, proved to be too cumbersome to use in other than direct assault with maximum force. The second make of Titan modules were bolt-on equipment for the upper torso only, and used battery packs, no longer having the option of a dedicated reactor. As such, it provided protection and power reserves without greatly impinging upon the Evangelion's mobility. Simulations, more simulations, live ammo practice runs. As soon as final word upon training was given to Masato, when it came to training, their regimen intensified several times over. It helped keep their minds off the absence among their number, but also taught them how not to play a game. Both Evangelions burst out of cover. Asuka held a positron gun, similar in principle to the nerve-built, and as it turned out, underpowered, positron rifle, but instead of draining from an internal capacitor, was hooked up directly to the batteries on her back. Instead of shots, the gun sent out a steady stream of packed positrons, the better to weaken an enemy's AT field. The Angel couldn't deflect this beam, held tight by the Red Ava's own AT field. It also meant she had to keep a constant bead upon the enemy. A pattern of sunken lines appeared across Ireul's body, lines which then grew bright red, and a similar constant beam shot forth from behind its AT field to carve across the building the Ava was using for cover. Asuka raised her own AT field. You're not expected to replace Shinji, she'd been told. We don't even want you to act like Shinji. Please don't destroy half the city every single time you're sent out. The teen grinned at the remembrance. Economics? No. Faith was a coin that could be spent. It was important that people continued to believe Tokyo 3 was still the best place to send their money, their goods, and their most talented mind. Festung Tokyo 3 needed their sacrifice to persist in its own survival. It was amazing the thoughts that could run through your mind as you died. It took a few more moments for Asuka to realize the screaming she was hearing was her own. She heard an eagle cry. Evangelion Unit 2 slammed to the ground. Alive, she thought. I'm alive. Her left arm buzzed with icy pain. The overwhelming terror slid away, like water off an oiled cloak. Asuka, she heard a far-off female voice. Can you hear me, Asuka? It was not Misato. It's not real, Soyu. Rei's voice was closer, clearer somehow. Then the redhead girl realized she was hearing it without electronic static. Another trick. 2 meshed AT fields could communicate for all known jamming. It is induced pain. You are well.
Fucking nose!
Asuka gasped out. That was enough of a hint for Ritsuko.
The most dangerous weapon of the Ava is the AT field, in of itself,
she explained tonelessly, as the main screen showed the angel trying to catch Unit 2 within the beam again. The Ava dodged, its right arm hanging limp.
The angel knows its scanning method has a certain effect on the human nervous system. The things are getting smarter. But how much smarter can they get?
What do you mean?
Misato asked archly.
It knows, yes. But how did it know? That sort of attack, because it has no material component, goes right through the random pattern AT field we use.
As if to punctuate her words, a yellowish beam passed through the command centre. None of the crew left their posts, to their credit, but those unfortunately caught in the beam screamed and fell over. They didn't get up again.
Rock doesn't seem to provide much protection either, the scientist continued. Every angel we face is just that much deadlier than the last.
Get some medics in here!
Misato shouted down. Screaming filled the command centre, in volume and hysteria greater than their own panic. Monitoring windows showed people stampeding out of their shelters. It was a sudden and merciless attack of claustrophobia. Children, the aged, it didn't matter. Those in the way were trampled, clawed with fingernails, bit, shoved, all the while all were screaming themselves hoarse. Animals. Frightened animals. All reason gone.
My God!
Misato whispered. It was an absolute disaster. They were totally helpless out there. Worse yet, their presence severely limited the Evangelion's manoeuvring room, unless she was willing to order the pilots to step wherever they needed. Shinji Ikari stood up, and there was a squelch as his hand was pulled free. Hasya fell to the floor, unmoving. There was no blood nor a gaping wound, yet the monks at the entrance had clearly seen his fist enter her head right up to the wrist. The boy looked away, unconcerned, to the west. Taking that moment of distraction, the acolytes of Javaal poured in to subdue him. The resulting explosion left a wide gap in the outer monastery's facade. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The AT field was in itself the Evangelion's most dangerous weapon. That was a concept central to her new gun. Rei took a deep breath and readied herself. Unit 0 had a larger backpack that forced the Evangelion to hunch over. Heat sinks wrapped around its arms gave the appearance of grossly oversized musculature. Its weapon, the Gargant Moonbiter, was no longer just a double-barrel heavy positron cannon. Asuka had fought long enough to take the enemy's attention, away from her own task. Rei dropped stealth, flared her AT field, and compressed it again. I do not fear death, she whispered, for I am chosen. Deep within the massive barrel, almost as long as the Evangelion, was tall, gaseous deuterium, pumped into a sealed chamber. Rei visualized a spinning globe and brought in her AT field. Heavy hydrogen atoms spun, were compressed, until there was a single sliver of frozen deuterium floating in the absolute centre of the breach. Still, she compressed it further, but not even her AT field could cause it to fuse. It was vastly more efficient than a magnetic bottle, though. Without that, the weapon would normally have needed power conduits and heat sinks so massive nothing short of a battleship could hold it. I do not waver, for my faith holds me. Ireul was getting closer. It didn't show a visible core, however, Perhaps it was simply on the side facing away from the city. The centre mass was the safest target. The orange Ava had braced itself against the building, with its cannon ruining the roof of another. Aiming nearly straight up was a tricky stance. Ray pulled the trigger. A 50-gigawatt laser shot out, unerringly straight, incidentally creating a temporary vacuum in the air as it passed. I do not stumble, for he is my light. Positron cannons could, with sufficient wattage, pierce AT fields because they fired positively charged electrons which had almost no mass to speak of. Photons, after all, could get through, even if distorted. Simple lasers were simply filtered of their thermal component. Cannons and explosions were stopped completely. Nerv had run many different tests at hideous cost as to the applied mechanics of the AT field. Ray unsealed the chamber. A great boom broke the air. Ignited by the laser and well contained in her AT field, plasma shot out of the barrel at a considerable fraction of light speed. The beam splashed against Ireul's defence, pulsing and writhing like a dragon out of hell, then crashed through. She did not smile. I do not grieve, for I am everything with his love. The angel's disc-like shape wobbled but didn't fall. The main disadvantage of the improved Moonbiter was that it took 3 seconds to cycle back to readiness. It felt like eternity. A pillar of yellow light passed over her. Pain seemed never-ending. Trident Base kept the land dreadnought in reserve. Although it might have armour twice thicker than an Ava, thrice in some places, there was no way it could help out there. There were other measures, however. SAM sites popped up and unloaded a volley of missiles up at the Angel. Instead of being loaded with explosives of dubious utility, the warheads burst into an expanding layer of hot black smoke. It was also doubtful that visual cover would do any good, but it gave the Avas enough time to roll behind buildings and drawing their AT fields for stealth again. Down below, everyone caught out in the streets felt air pressure pushing them down. The chaff cover dispersed, and Ireul began randomly lashing out its psychic beam. Toji pulled Hikari to a storefront as the sickly yellow beam passed by. Even at such a distance they could feel it radiating bad things. They winced as the beam continued on, towards people just starting to get their senses back. They ran from it, screaming, and those too slow to get away made noises akin to that of slaughtered animals. Where are those goddamn kids? Toji spat aside.
Maybe they did the sensible thing and tried to find shelter,
Hikari replied. The angel did not affect everyone the same way. There were those who'd managed to keep some sanity, and were already starting to pull the fallen back to the sidewalks.
Should we help?
Toji blinked, surprised that she was letting him take point. He shrugged. I need to find my sister. Hikari nodded. She was worried for her own sister too. She'd seen Nozomi heading off to a shelter earlier, and could only hope the little girl was still there. Mari Suzahara was a more immediate problem. The two teens ran down the streets, their hands still clasped together. Elsewhere, Makoto clutched at his head. That humming, he hissed out. Kaede was already having trouble breathing.
It's getting worse,
she said. The Nerve second lieutenant looked up at the angel.
It's like I can almost hear the thing glow. Tremble, mortals, in despair.
Kodama snorted at that.
Stupid thing doesn't really know us all that well, does it?
She lifted a large knife she had found, looted, off a hardware store and cut at the trailing rope near her.
I'm done at this end.
They were lashing a horizontal pole onto the ladder of a fire truck. Makoto finished shortly after. Kaede was cutting holes into a folded heap of thick red fabric. Wind gusted through the street again, howling, accompanied by flashes behind the next row of buildings, casting briefly their hideaway into shadow. They pulled their makeshift cloaks tight, nothing more than the white display flags of Nerve pulled free and put on, weakly warding away the cold. Even through that infernal humming pulse of the angel, the shrieks and booms of counterfire, they first heard, then seen the commotion happening at the end of the street. Makoto made several short hops and slid into the driver's seat. For some reason, a part of himself felt gratified. About damn time he was able to commandeer a vehicle. A man screamed and leapt, his face streaked with fresh nail wounds. Toji cursed his own sense of propriety and machismo. Kensuke always went out armed with no less than 2 bolt pistols and 4 extra clips. He, however, wanted to separate himself from that sort of creepy military mania. The stream of panic and hysteria had turned into a flood. Here and there were literal islands of sanity, as people took to high ground away from the madness. It wasn't good to linger in the streets. Daka! Hikari, bless her lovely heart, carried a small 6-round custom bolt pistol. She knew her own physical frailty, and at Tokyo 3, even in the midst of jubilation, was always a war zone. Never again would he ridicule why women had to tote along their purses no matter what. Toji dropped to one knee and punched out, an uppercut stunning another of the mindless mob. "Marie!" he shouted frantically. "Where are you?" Incoherent screams were the only answer. A shrieking woman had managed to pin him down. Then, whack! Clang! The woman blinked. Slightly frenzied himself, Toji slugged her in the face and rolled back to his feet. Hikari kicked aside a man clutching at his gonads and looked around. That voice, so surprisingly loud from a small source. Somewhere, there were the sounds of metal striking metal, ringing and rising above the angel's unnatural tones. Whack! Bong, ba-bong, clank, bop, bop, boing, clank, funk. Whack! Bong, ba-bong, clank, bop, bop, boing, clank, funk. Everyone watched in stunned silence as 3 children walked fearlessly through the manic street. They beat sticks and soup ladles upon open pots, like metal drums, though musical and coordinated they were hardly that. Look! The steady beat of Ireul's scanning pulse hitched, its echo distorted. There was not faith so pure and utterly certain as that of a child. Toji could only run there, grab his sister by the shoulders and say, "What the fuck?" Only barely was he able to restrain himself. "What do you think you're doing?"
Hi, Nishan,
she said, piling on the cuteness as his brotherly worry threatened to spill over.
No sweat. Just chasing them bad sounds away.
Hikari's brows lifted. It was impressive in its own way that the little girl realised unaudible sounds could have an effect on people. But it was naive to think that just banging at things could overcome the immense presence of the creature hanging above. "You can't do that," Toji said, shaking her. "Stop playing around. Do you know how worried I was? Don't do this to me."
But
Marie was starting to get teary. The boys with her were starting to unravel emotionally as well. Their clamour had dwindled to a little tap tap tap, yet they didn't want to stop. Hikari put a hand to his shoulder.
Toji, wait,
she whispered. She put the bolt pistol back onto her pack and waved at the air.
Can you feel that?
What? Of course I... The teen stopped and stood up. He took a deep breath and listened to his heartbeat. No, I can't. For some reason, the induced fear had gone. The children resumed their banging to fill up the silence. A few of the people prone on the street, several of them from safe bolt shots, began to stir again. The next pulse hit them all like a hammer blow. The angel's random lashing out of its psychic beam had found their street. The yellow light, much wider now, dragged ever so slowly and menacingly closer. The people began to panic and run. The children began banging at their pots with all their strength, with their eyes closed and faces scrunched up. They didn't move from their position, and thus their guardian teens remained there as well. Toji ruffled his sister's hair and grinned. "I'm here," he said. He watched carefully as the panicking stampede brought several large men scrambling over to smash into them. Whoosh! They ducked as the onrushing was knocked down as if by a wet fist. There was the induced fear of the angel, then there was the all-too-real fear of drowning. Kaide had taken his place at the reel, and Makoto fought to keep the water holes under control. "Shut it off!" he yelled as men had dazedly decided to just stay down. He moved the dwindling water blast away from the group of miners. "Hikari!" Kodama shouted. "Thank goodness you're safe!" "Get on!" Makoto added. The kids didn't hesitate, though the boys kept trying to drum on even as they piled onto the vehicle. The truck then attempted to turn about, but there were too many people. "To the sides!" he then began to shout. "Run to the sides! It's not real anyway! You're alive, and the Evangelions will protect you! Hold, damn you all! This is your city! Don't let that thing beat you!" Kaede began beeping the horn to try and get their attention. Pots were banged in wild abandon. No one else around them were inclined to listen. "We're people, damn it!" Makoto whispered bitterly. "It shouldn't matter if those beasts can destroy our civilization. As long as we keep our minds, we can always shine again."
"We should raise this up," Kodama said. "If they won't listen, maybe they can watch."
She tried to push the ladder up.
"Help me!"
she commanded Toji. The boy, conditioned to obey the words of a Hiraki, immediately did so. There was a level near the driver that used mechanical lifts. Kaede pulled on it. Toji blinked owlishly as he too began to rise and let go. The large flag lashed onto the ladder unfurled, just as Ireul's fearful light was almost upon them.
"It's not real, right?" Kodama whispered. "It's just fear. It's just pain."
"As long as we remain," Makoto answered. He stepped up to the driver's cabin roof to face it first. His face was twisted in defiance. The pressure wave reached him first, sending his white cloak flapping about like the wings of a bird, and the banner seemed to writhe. The Hakone First PDF flag was a strange winged symbol, red on black. There were those who saw a two-headed bird. To some it seemed like a weird, vaguely humanoid figure descending head first. Others saw the outline of a Torii temple entrance. The yellow light bathed it and held. The people in the fire truck hunched over on receiving the full force of the angel's attack, a mental thrust intense enough to pass through AT fields and strike an Evangelion senseless. The heady pounding air, that frozen disdain, that silent condemnation upon infinity's shore, broke apart as an eagle shrieked in victory. "We refuse to die!" The yellow light seemed to refract, turning golden, its chill of fear warming as unto the comfort of the sun. Makoto stood up and looked up, his eyes glinting with that glorious glow. "Fear is nothing!" he shouted up. "Faith is all!" The symbol above him also had a distinct resemblance to an anchor, and it was that they all needed most at that moment. Ireul paused, seemingly confused. That was when Rei shot it again with the hellbore. The angel let out a trill of pain, vibrating the air. Asuka began to carve into it with the positron gun. Its disc-like body contracted, turning back into its previous bell-like shape. Gaping holes remained in its structure. Its AT field flared again, one punishing blast of pressure that splintered the taller buildings. And it was away, fleeing, back up into the night beyond the sky. It left those in the command center gaping with disbelief.
"They are getting smarter!"
Misato snarled out. No angel before had truly an idea of a tactical withdrawal. Half a world away, and pinned under several determined acolytes, Shinji Ikari was still laughing. He laughed with tears streaming down his cheeks, his gut starting to hurt. "So, you think you lack power, do you?" he heard a familiar female voice croon. "It is simple then. If you do not have," Chaos whispered, "you must take." One of the older monks opened his palms out, bluish sparks building between, and pressed his hands onto the boy's head. And then, there was only silence and darkness.